September 2008, Harrison County, Kentucky, was gradually embracing the coolness of autumn. The forests surrounding Madison Lake were painted in crimson and golden hues, and the air was filled with the scent of decaying leaves. For the locals, this time of year was always special, a season when nature slowly fell asleep, leaving behind a quiet and serene landscape. Jake Wilson, a 30-year-old resident of Harrison, lived in a small house on the edge of the forest. He often enjoyed spending his mornings outdoors, walking along the shores of the lake, fishing, and savoring the solitude. On this day, he decided to go on his usual walk to clear his mind and escape the worries of daily life. Madison Lake was a place of tranquility. Its calm surface reflected the sky, and gentle waves played along the shore, rustling softly. But this time, something was off. Jake felt it as soon as he approached the water. At first, he couldn't pinpoint what was bothering him, but his instincts, honed after years of hunting and surviving in the wild, told him something had changed. Pushing through the dense underbrush at the water's edge, Jake suddenly noticed strange tracks in the soft earth. They were enormous, much larger than human footprints, and their shape seemed unnatural. The tracks led deep into the forest, where trees and bushes grew thickly together, as if concealing something. "What is this?" Jake muttered, crouching down to examine the tracks more closely. He tried to compare them to prints of animals he knew, but none matched. The tracks were deep, with clearly visible claw marks. A chill ran down Jake's spine. With each step deeper into the forest, his sense of unease grew. An eerie silence enveloped him, broken only by the rustle of his own footsteps. It was unnatural. Normally, the forest would be filled with the sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves, or the distant barking of dogs. But not today. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. In a small clearing, Jake suddenly caught a whiff of a horrible smell, a mix of rot and something chemical. Unpleasant. He covered his nose with his hand, trying not to breathe in the foul air, and moved forward. To his horror, he stumbled upon a foul dump, littered with the remains of animals and debris resembling hunting trophies. Everything inside Jake twisted with fear. This place was clearly not just a garbage dump. He saw the remains of deer and small animals, and nearby were fragments of old tools and rusty traps, as if someone had been hunting here not for sustenance, but for cruel sport. Nausea rose in his throat, but Jake suppressed it and looked around. At that moment, he suddenly felt he was not alone. A faint rustling of leaves, barely audible in the silence, made him jump. He turned sharply, but saw no one. Only the trees and bushes seemed to close in around him, dimming the daylight. Something in this place filled him with an unbearable sense of danger. Jake took a step back, then another, never taking his eyes off the forest. His heart pounded, and one thought kept running through his mind. "I need to get out of here, and fast." When Jake returned home, his mind was racing with thoughts. He didn't yet know that this was just the beginning of a chain of events that would turn his life upside down and drag him into the depths of an unknown horror. To understand what was happening, Jake began questioning his neighbors and the local residents. He first turned to the village elders, who were most knowledgeable about local myths and legends. One early evening, he visited a cafe where the townspeople gathered to drink coffee and discuss the latest events. In the cafe sat Garth Williams, an elderly forest ranger who was rumored to know every trail in the county. Garth was the first to talk about the strange happenings in the woods. He described a giant creature, covered in thick fur, which several people had allegedly seen. "It's some kind of monster that emerges from the woods and terrifies people," Garth said. "It's often seen near the lake, and it makes such horrible sounds that it makes your hair stand on end." Next, Jake visited Mary Samuels, the owner of the local store. Like many others, Mary believed that something inexplicable was at work in the area. "I saw it once when I was still young," Mary recalled, her voice trembling with the memory. "It was a huge silhouette, and it gave off a horrible stench. My friends and I tried to figure out what it was, but we found nothing. People say it's a local creature from ancient legends." The rumors about the creature were so tangled and contradictory that Jake began to doubt his ability to separate fact from fiction. However, the overall picture was shaping up to be something much more sinister than he had imagined. Some said the creature never fully showed itself, and its form and size varied from story to story. Some described it as a giant bear, while others saw it as something between a human and a beast. There were also rumors among the locals that the creature had ties to ancient rituals and local tribes. One story claimed that it guarded ancient treasures or ancient spells that were once used in sacrifices. Some residents claimed that they had encountered the creature themselves or seen its tracks. Bob Jenkins, a fisherman, told Jake about a night when he and his friends heard a terrifying scream from the woods, but no one dared to leave their tents to check the source of the sound. "We heard it at night. It howled like something demonic, but no one dared to look into the darkness," Bob said. "The next morning, we found tracks, but no evidence we could present." Jake was struck by how widespread these fears were and how they shaped the lives of the local residents. Each conversation revealed new details and expanded his understanding of what was happening by the lake. He began to realize that these were not just rumors, but a genuine part of the local culture and mythology. After these conversations, Jake felt compelled to take action. The locals' stories, though frightening, couldn't fully explain the mysterious tracks he had discovered. He decided that to get to the bottom of things, he needed to personally investigate the place where this mythical creature was rumored to dwell. A week after hearing the initial rumors and talking to the locals, Jake Winters decided to investigate the area around Madison Lake himself. Determined to uncover what was really happening in this eerie place and to understand the origin of the strange tracks he had found, he prepared for the task. Knowing that the locals considered Madison Lake a dangerous place, Jake made thorough preparations. He took a flashlight, a camera, and a pair of gloves to avoid leaving any traces. Armed with the most detailed maps of the area he could find, he also brought a GPS device and a notebook for taking notes. Just in case, Jake informed his friends about his plans and arranged for them to check on him if he was delayed. When Jake arrived at the lake, dusk was already setting in. He noticed an unusual silence around him. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The fog that enveloped the area gave the scene an even more sinister appearance. The dump was located in a thicket, far from the main trails. Among dense bushes and broken trees, Jake found a pile of trash. Plastic bottles, old rusty cans, and remnants of other items, likely discarded by hunters, were scattered on the ground. But amidst this chaos, Jake noticed something unusual. As he sifted through the trash, Jake came across a heap of animal remains. Bones, something that resembled bits of fur, and even torn pieces of skin were strewn among the debris. Some of the bones appeared to have been broken with great force. This was clearly not just random garbage but something far more sinister. Jake also found several items that might have been part of hunters' trophies, antlers, pelts, and even old bows and arrows. One of the items, an old hunting knife, was lying on the ground, covered in dirt. It was stained with dried blood, which made Jake truly uneasy. These discoveries not only supported the idea that something was happening here but also heightened his concern. In addition to the visual discoveries, Jake also noticed an unbearable smell emanating from the dump. It was the scent of decay mixed with something chemical and metallic. Jake covered his nose with a handkerchief and continued his investigation, documenting the objects he found with his camera. He tried to understand what these remains could mean and how they related to the locals' descriptions of the mythical creature. As night fell over the area, Jake decided to head back home. He was troubled by what he had found. All these discoveries clearly indicated that someone was trying to cover up something serious, possibly illegal hunting or something even more terrifying. Jake was determined to piece together all the evidence and figure out what was truly behind these frightening stories about the creature at Madison Lake. Jake returned home, shaken by what he had seen. He carefully reviewed his notes and photos, trying to match the evidence he had found with the stories from the locals. It seemed to him that everything was connected and that the creature people spoke of was not just a myth, but a real threat that could be responsible for what he had uncovered. A month had passed since Jake Winters last visited Madison Lake. During this time, his life had changed. Initially, Jake thought he could calmly deal with the tracks and remains he had discovered, but soon he began to notice strange things happening around him, and the feeling of unease never left him for a moment. At first, these were small, almost insignificant events. Jake started hearing strange noises at night, as if someone was digging under his house. He also noticed that an unpleasant smell, reminiscent of the one from the dump near the lake, began to surround his home. Friends and neighbors assured him that it was probably just random coincidences, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. A couple of weeks after his last visit to the lake, Jake found several deep tracks in his backyard, similar to those he had seen at the lake. They were fresh, and it seemed like someone had tried to cover them up. Jake even found some tracks leading toward his house but abruptly ending. As if someone had noticed they were being followed. One night, Jake saw a figure in his window that quickly disappeared around the corner as soon as he turned on the light. When he went outside to check, no one was around, but there were several strange objects in his yard, branches and sticks arranged in a peculiar pattern, as if someone was trying to leave a message. Jake also noticed that the smell coming from his property had become even more intense. He tried various methods to get rid of it, but the stench seemed to penetrate deep into the house. Calling pest control services yielded no results. No specialist could explain the source of the odor. Shortly after, Jake realized that his personal belongings had started to disappear. At first, it was small items like tools and some things from the garage, but then more valuable possessions went missing, such as his hunting equipment. Jake began to wonder if these thefts were connected to his recent discoveries and the mysterious events happening around the lake. Despite everything that was happening, Jake encountered disbelief from his friends and neighbors. Some thought he was just overreacting, that it was all in his imagination. Even those who believed in his story began to doubt his reasoning. This undermined his confidence and led to an even greater sense of isolation. Finally, deciding that he had to take action, Jake made up his mind to return to Madison Lake. The sense of threat and the confusion over what was happening pushed him to do whatever it took to uncover the mystery of this enigmatic place. He also began to prepare for potential dangers, taking with him not only equipment for recording but also a few items for self-defense, to be ready for any unexpected situations. It was early morning. A thick fog lay over Madison Lake, shrouding the water and surrounding trees in a dense, damp cloud. Jake Winters, unable to shake off a sense of dread, returned to the lake once more. He had decided that it was time to uncover the truth and either confirm or disprove his suspicions. He hoped that a thorough examination and new observations would help him understand what was really happening. Jake had prepared for this trip in advance. He brought a camera, several powerful flashlights, a hunting knife, and a flare gun. He was ready for anything. Though he was bracing himself for something terrifying, he still hoped to find some concrete evidence. When Jake reached the lake, the fog had begun to dissipate, but it remained thick and impenetrable. The lake looked the same as before, eerily calm and quiet, but now it was surrounded by an even more nauseating aura. Jake noticed that the smell he had previously sensed at his home was now fully present here, mixing with the fog and the dampness of the forest. After a while, Jake noticed a solitary figure at the edge of the forest, right at the boundary of the fog. At first, he thought it might be a tree or a bush, but the figure moved and started to approach him. The creature was huge and dark, covered in thick fur, and it emitted strange, eerie sounds, reminiscent of creaking and growling. The creature produced deep, muffled sounds that seemed unnatural and frightening. The sound was a mix of a cry and some primal growl. The smell that Jake sensed was unbearable, a mix of decay, sweat, and something else that was hard to define. All of this together created a feeling of genuine horror. Realizing that he couldn't handle the situation, Jake began to act. In a panic, he pulled out the flare gun and fired it into the air. The shot rang out dully, echoed by the forest, but the creature did not retreat. It froze in place, still watching Jake, as if evaluating his actions. Watching the creature, Jake felt his heart race. Fear and anxiety overwhelmed him, and he understood that he was out of his depth. He felt that his time in this place was up and that he needed to leave as quickly as possible. Barely keeping his composure, Jake made his way back to his car. He ran the distance from the lake to the vehicle, feeling the awful smell and sounds following him even as he neared the car. Once behind the wheel, he drove away quickly, leaving the lake and the creature behind. Jake Winters had never felt as vulnerable as he did after encountering the creature at Madison Lake. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, a sensation that grew stronger each day. Returning to the lake had only intensified his fears. The terrifying sounds and foul odor haunted him, and he began to genuinely fear for his life. After spending the night at home, Jake could barely sleep. His thoughts kept returning to that dreadful encounter, and he feared that the creature might have followed him. He woke up early, feeling the urge to check the lake again. Thoughts raced through his mind about how things could have ended if he hadn't fled the scene. When Jake returned to the lake, his fears were confirmed. The forest fog, just as thick as before, had not lifted. Suddenly, he felt surrounded by the stench he recognized, the same awful smell he had encountered last time. His heart began to race, and panic set in. Jake's camera and flashlights were ready for use, but he couldn't bring himself to approach the spot where he had seen the creature. Strange noises once again began emanating from the forest. The creaking and growling grew louder, as if the creature was getting closer. Jake spotted a dark silhouette among the trees and felt his fear intensify. The creature he had seen before emerged from the fog once more. It moved slowly but with purpose, and Jake realized it was much closer than before. In fear and confusion, he pulled out his flare gun and fired it into the air. The flash and loud sound shattered the silence, but the creature did not retreat. It froze in place, and Jake could see its eyes still fixed on him. The horrifying gaze and foul odor were enough to drive Jake to the brink of madness. He knew that staying was too dangerous. Realizing he wouldn't achieve anything more, he abandoned all his gear and hurried toward his car. Every step was filled with fear and panic. Jake ran down the path, trying not to look back. With every step, he felt as if he could hear footsteps behind him, but he didn't dare stop to check. When he reached his car, his hands were shaking so badly that it took several tries to unlock the door. His heart was pounding, and he was on the verge of tears. Turning the ignition, Jake sped away from the place, leaving the terrifying lake and the mysterious creature behind. He drove down the road in the dark, his eyes focused straight ahead as if he expected something to peer out of the darkness in front of him. When he finally reached his home, he felt a sense of relief, but the fear hadn't left him. He knew he had to tell his friends and the local authorities about what had happened. But what could he say? How could he explain something he couldn't understand himself? Jake sat down at his table, trying to calm himself, but his thoughts kept returning to the lake and the creature. He knew he couldn't just ignore what had happened. He realized that he had to take action and find out what was really going on at Madison Lake. As Jake struggled to cope with his fear, he made a decision not to leave the matter unresolved. He decided that next time, he would be better prepared and wouldn't let fear take control. A few days after his terrifying experience at Madison Lake, Jake Winters decided to take drastic action. He called the local police and reported what had happened. His voice still carried traces of fear and anxiety as he recounted the strange creature and his recent observations to Sheriff John Hayes and his deputy, Mark Reed. They listened attentively to his story but, as expected, started by verifying the facts. Sheriff Hayes and Deputy Reed arrived at Madison Lake the next day, hoping to find some evidence. Despite Jake's warnings about potential dangers, the officers began surveying the area. The morning fog still shrouded the lake, giving it a grim and ominous appearance. The detectives started with a thorough inspection of the spot where Jake claimed to have seen the creature. They found tracks on the ground and suspicious marks on the trees that seemed unusual and defied easy explanation. However, despite the odd nature of these signs, nothing concrete was found that could explain the creature's behavior. Soon, the detectives came across debris resembling parts of an old landfill, but this seemed more like the result of time and the elements rather than something mystical. To confirm this, they also discovered traces of wildlife, including tracks from large animals like bears. After surveying the area, the sheriff and his deputy returned to Jake to discuss their findings and next steps. Jake, sitting in his home, was disappointed and worried. He once again described how the creature had moved toward him and his decision to fire a warning shot into the air for protection. Sheriff Hayes listened to Jake carefully, but his experience suggested that much of what had been described could be the result of an overactive imagination or temporary psychosis induced by fear and stress. He advised Jake to calm down and recommended that he return to his normal life while they continued their investigation. Meanwhile, the police sent samples of the tracks and evidence for analysis. However, after a week, they had not received any significant results confirming the existence of a mystical creature. The tracks were deemed inconclusive and provided no clear information about their origin. Despite this, Jake remained unsatisfied with the results. He continued to feel that there was more to Madison Lake than just wild animals and debris. He knew that the next step would be to try to gather more evidence on his own. Jake's story didn't completely disappear from the news in Harrison County, though it gradually became less prominent. Local residents continued to discuss his account, but many were skeptical. Jake understood that he didn't have much time to find proof and vindicate himself. His fears and suspicions still gnawed at him, and he was willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth about what lurked at Madison Lake. After the police left Madison Lake without finding anything concrete, Jake Winters felt confused and alone. He knew that his observations and fears might seem absurd, so he decided to discuss his experiences with his closest friends, hoping to find support and assistance. Jake gathered his most trusted friends, including James Davis, his longtime friend and business associate, as well as Mia Carter, a local journalist with a keen interest in mysterious events and the supernatural. Jake chose a secluded cafe on the outskirts of town for their meeting, to discuss his concerns without any unwanted ears around. At the meeting, Jake recounted his experiences, starting from the moment he discovered the strange tracks by the lake, to the frightening encounter with the dark creature in the morning fog. He described how the creature moved toward him and how, in desperation, he fired a shot into the air. "I know this sounds strange," Jake began, "but I'm certain that what I saw was not just a figment of my imagination. It couldn't have been a regular animal. It made terrifying sounds and had a disgusting smell. I felt like it was something much more than just a wild beast." Mia Carter, always inclined toward investigations, was intrigued by Jake's story. She offered to help him gather additional evidence and promised to make a few calls to learn more about any possible mystical phenomena in the area. "This sounds like a great story for my next report," Mia said. "I can conduct my own investigation and talk to the locals. There might be something they're not telling the police." However, James Davis was more skeptical. He expressed doubts about the whole situation and was convinced that Jake might have fallen victim to his imagination or stress. "Jake, you need to be careful," James said. "Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us. Maybe it's just fear of the unknown that's turning into something terrifying. I'm not saying you're wrong, but we need more evidence." Despite the differences in opinion, Jake was grateful for his friends' support and their willingness to help. Mia began her own investigation, while James decided to explore more logical explanations for the incident. Mia promised to gather testimonies and conduct interviews with other residents of Harrison County to find out if they had similar experiences or stories. She also planned to check local media records for any strange occurrences that might be connected to Madison Lake. James, on the other hand, decided to talk to wildlife experts and biologists to determine what animals could have left such tracks and why they might exhibit such unusual behavior. He also promised to speak with the police about possible inaccuracies in their investigation. By the end of the meeting, Jake felt a little better. He was determined not to give up until he got satisfactory answers and unraveled the mystery of Madison Lake. A few days had passed since Jake's meeting with his friends. Mia Carter, the local journalist, wasted no time and began working diligently on her article about the strange events at Madison Lake. She gathered information and interviewed local residents who also reported strange occurrences. For Mia, preparing these materials became a passion, and she was determined to uncover the truth. However, when the story made it to local newspapers and news outlets, the situation took an unexpected turn. Mia published an article titled, "Mysterious Creature at Madison Lake. Fantasy or Real Threat?" In the piece, she detailed Jake's experiences, his encounter with the dark creature, and the strange tracks found near the lake. The article quickly caught the public's attention. Local residents began discussing the article fervently. Social media exploded with comments and speculation about the mysterious creature. While some users expressed skepticism, others were frightened and demanded action from the authorities. There were even videos and photos purportedly taken near the lake, which allegedly confirmed the presence of an unusual creature. Thanks to Mia's article, local media began covering the story in more depth. Television reporters and radio hosts arrived in Harrison County to film reports and conduct interviews with Jake and Mia. The story about the mysterious creature at Madison Lake became popular, drawing attention not only from local but also from national news outlets. The situation started to spiral out of control. Local authorities, including Sheriff John Hayes, were alarmed by the growing public interest and the tension among the county's residents. The sheriff decided to hold a press conference to calm the public and address concerns about safety. At the press conference, Sheriff Hayes stated that the investigation was still ongoing, but no evidence had been found to prove the existence of a dangerous creature. He also mentioned that the investigation had not uncovered any threats to the population and urged residents to remain calm. "We understand that the story has garnered a lot of attention," the sheriff said, "but at this time, we have no reason to be concerned. We are continuing the investigation and will keep the public informed of any new findings." Despite the reassurances from the authorities, Jake Winters felt even more disheartened. He was frustrated that his words and fears were now being questioned, and that the media, which he had hoped to use to find the truth, was now creating even more noise and confusion. Mia, on the other hand, felt that her work was just beginning. She continued to conduct interviews and gather materials, hoping to uncover the truth despite the pressure and threats that began to come her way and to Jake. Mia knew she needed to proceed cautiously to avoid bringing more trouble upon herself or her friends. One evening, Mia invited Jake to a meeting with reporters who were still interested in the mysterious creature. They were planning to film a special report on the events in Harrison County, including personal testimonies from Jake and Mia. Although Jake was apprehensive, he agreed to help, hoping that this could lead to further revelations. Once the report was ready, local news channels and newspapers began broadcasting the material, accompanied by interviews with Jake and Mia. This wave of coverage attracted even more attention, and soon Madison Lake became a symbol of mystery and intrigue, further fueling public interest and generating new rumors and speculations. A week after Jake Winters' story hit the media, his life took a drastic turn. He began receiving anonymous letters with threatening messages in the mail. The first letter arrived at the start of the week, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a sheet of paper with a handwritten note, "Leave while you can. The threat isn't just to you." Jake was shocked and concerned. He showed the letter to Mia Carter, who advised him to report the threats to the police. However, Jake wasn't sure if that was the right course of action, as he suspected the threat might be connected to larger issues than just local fears. Mia also started receiving anonymous calls and messages demanding she stop her investigation and cease spreading information about the mysterious creature. In one voicemail, the voice on the other end threatened that they would regret their interference. These threats began to weigh on Mia and Jake, creating a sense of paranoia and fear. Mia and Jake discussed their concerns. Jake was convinced that someone in the local community, or possibly even the authorities, didn't want the truth to come out. He suspected it might be related to illegal activities he was trying to uncover. Mia tried to support him but also began to question the safety of their investigation. The local authorities began acting oddly. The police ignored Jake's reports about the threats and showed little interest in the new evidence he might have had. Sheriff John Hayes, who had previously assured the public there was no danger, now avoided giving direct answers to Mia and Jake's questions about additional threats and strange occurrences. Jake and Mia also noticed new signs forbidding access to certain areas around Madison Lake. These signs seemed to appear suddenly, with no official explanation. Jake began to suspect that the authorities might be involved in something illegal connected to the disappearances and threats. Shortly after receiving the threats, Jake received another letter, but this one was different. It contained details about illegal hunting of rare animals in the county. The letter claimed that this business might be connected to the mysterious creatures Jake had seen at the lake. It also suggested that some local authorities might be involved in covering up this activity. Jake and Mia spent time studying this new letter. It mentioned specific people and places that could be tied to illegal hunting. This lifted the veil on possible motives behind the events and confirmed their suspicions that someone in the local government might be involved in a cover-up scheme. After serious consideration, Jake and Mia decided they couldn't just leave the situation as it was. They understood that their investigation and desire to uncover the truth could lead to danger, but they resolved to continue, determined to find out what was behind the threats and mysterious events at Madison Lake. Realizing they needed more evidence, Jake Winters and his friends decided to return to Madison Lake. This time, they prepared thoroughly for the expedition. They gathered modern equipment, night vision cameras, motion detectors, and even several mobile phones with sound recording apps. Mia Carter brought her laptop and other tools for data analysis. Despite their preparation, the tension was palpable. An air of fear surrounded them as they anticipated encountering something dangerous. Jake and his team knew that the creature they were trying to uncover could be not only massive and intimidating but potentially aggressive as well. At dawn, Jake and his team arrived at the lake. The scene had changed. New no trespassing signs had been erected by the local authorities. This only heightened their suspicions that something was amiss. Looking at the lake, they saw that the fog had once again enveloped the area, giving everything a mystical atmosphere. They set up cameras at strategically important points, directing them towards the most suspicious areas: the lake, the forest, and the spot where Jake had previously discovered strange tracks. They also placed several motion detectors to capture any movement in the area. Jake and his team decided to first check the dump he had discovered earlier. They believed it might be connected to the creature. The dump looked as it had before, abandoned and covered in trash. This time, Jake and his friends found even more debris and animal remains. They also noticed that part of the dump seemed to have been recently rearranged or altered, as if someone was trying to hide traces. While examining the debris, the team found several items that seemed unusual: pieces of skin not matching any local animals, and damaged bones. These findings reinforced their suspicion that the dump might be related to the creature they had heard about. After checking the dump, Jake's team returned to the lake. They settled into their hideout, waiting for something to happen. Night fell, and the fog began to thicken, creating ideal conditions for observation. The cameras and detectors started operating, recording any movements and sounds. Suddenly, one of the detectors triggered, signaling movement in the forest. Jake and his team watched the monitors with bated breath. They saw a blurred silhouette moving towards their camp. The fog and darkness made it nearly indistinguishable, but they could make out that it was a huge, dark shape, very similar to what Jake had seen during his previous visit. Jake and his friends could hardly believe their eyes. The existence of the creature they had considered a myth now seemed real. The creature was not approaching them but simply moving through the forest as if exploring the area. At one point, it stopped, and their camera captured its silhouette. Summoning their courage, Jake decided to take some photos and record video. His hands trembled as he tried not to miss the moment. They also recorded the sounds the creature made: deep, low growls that seemed to emanate from the depths of the forest. Once they finished recording, the creature vanished into the forest, leaving behind only a foul smell and a sense of dread. Despite the evidence they had collected, Jake's team felt uneasy. The night grew dark and cold, and they were ready to return to the car and leave the lake behind. Several days had passed since Jake Winters and his friends last visited Madison Lake. On the morning Jake had planned a solo return trip to the lake, his friends noticed he was particularly tense. He assured them it was crucial for the investigation's completion and that he needed to be alone to avoid distractions. However, when Jake did not return at the promised time that evening, his friends began to worry. They tried calling him, but their attempts were in vain. An air of anxious tension pervaded among them. Each of them understood that Jake might have encountered trouble. Mia Carter and a few of Jake's other friends decided to head to the lake to find out what had happened to him. They searched the surrounding area, starting from the location where Jake had set up the cameras. The camera was in place, but the recorded data only showed ordinary night sounds and minor animal movements. Soon, they found tracks leading to the lake. The area around was heavily shrouded in fog, severely limiting visibility. Nevertheless, the tire tracks led to the lake, where they noticed unusual tracks that did not belong to any known animals. While searching for Jake, the group stumbled upon his car, parked not far from the lake. The car was locked, but inside they found signs of distress, torn pieces of clothing and his personal belongings. One of Jake's friends, Alex, an experienced tracker, noticed that the clothing scraps appeared to have been torn in a struggle. These scraps were scattered in the area between the lake and the forest, indicating that Jake might have been trying to escape or fight something. After discovering the torn clothing and tracks, Mia and the others immediately reported the incident to the police. Sheriff John Hayes and his deputy, Mark Reed, who were already familiar with the situation, promptly organized a search operation. The police launched an extensive search of the lake area. They used dogs for tracking and deployed drones for aerial surveillance. Despite their efforts, the search results were disappointing. No signs of Jake were found, and the search dragged on. With each passing day, the hope of finding Jake diminished. It became evident that his disappearance was not merely coincidental. The group, who returned to the lake the next day, discovered that the cameras and sensors Jake had set up were damaged or missing. The fog that enveloped the lake seemed even thicker, adding to the gloomy and mysterious atmosphere. Despite the lack of clear signs of Jake, the police continued to explore other possible leads. Experts examined the previously found torn pieces of Jake's clothing and discovered that they had been ripped with unusual force. It was possible that something or someone had been responsible for tearing the fabric. Additionally, the police found several tracks that did not belong to known animals in the region, suggesting the presence of unknown creatures in the area. The police also returned to the local residents to gather more information. They asked about anything people might have noticed recently. Some claimed to have seen strange figures in the forest or heard eerie sounds. These accounts did not provide clear answers but contributed to the overall sense of uncertainty. Jake's friends continued their search despite the official results. They requested access to the data from Jake's cameras and other devices, hoping to find important information. They tried to analyze everything that could indicate their friend's whereabouts and continued to search for any clues that might lead them to him. As each day passed without finding Jake, the pressure on the police and his friends increased. The public and local residents began to ask questions and express their concerns. Some started to believe in mystical stories about a creature they thought might be linked to Jake's disappearance. As the tension mounted, Sheriff Hayes and his team continued to monitor any new information that might emerge. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, they remained hopeful and persisted in their search, working diligently to understand what happened to Jake and to find answers that could aid in this mysterious case. As Jake's search continued and his disappearance remained a mystery, investigators began to examine the data they already had more closely. The investigation led detectives to focus on illegal hunting groups operating in the area. Anonymous tips and hints suggested that there might be illegal hunting of rare animals in Harrison County, potentially covered up by local authorities. During one of the search operations, the police discovered an old, abandoned warehouse a few miles from Lake Madison. The warehouse was filled with various hunting trophies and animal parts that experts believed were obtained illegally. This warehouse was linked to several suspicious individuals who might be involved in illegal hunting. Documents found on the premises contained names and addresses that helped narrow down the list of suspects. Investigators found that one of the names in the documents was connected to a person named Thomas Wilson, a well-known hunter and owner of private hunting grounds. Wilson and his partners frequently hunted in the Lake Madison area. Additionally, it was revealed that Wilson had clashed with Jake several times over land rights and hunting territories. Detectives arranged for an interrogation of Thomas Wilson. During the questioning, he appeared nervous but not overly agitated. He claimed to have no connection to Jake's disappearance and that all his hunting activities were legal. However, inconsistencies in his statements and actions emerged during the interrogation. Wilson mentioned that Jake often appeared on his property without permission, which could have led to conflicts. The investigation also uncovered compromising information about local authorities who had turned a blind eye to the illegal activities of hunters. This information included correspondence discussing bribes and corruption. Local authorities might have been involved in covering up the activities of illegal hunters, and as detectives discovered, this cover-up could be linked to Jake's disappearance. The investigation revealed the existence of a complex network of conspirators involved in illegal hunting and wildlife trafficking. Testimonies from several informed sources and scattered data indicated that there was an entire underground community covering its actions through corruption and threats. This community could be connected to Jake's disappearance, especially considering his active attempts to expose them. With the new data, detectives began reassessing potential connections between Jake and the individuals mentioned in the investigation. They also revisited the data on the strange threats Jake had received, trying to determine who might be behind these threats and how they could be related to his disappearance. After an intensive investigation, evidence review, and interrogations, Harrison County officially closed the case of Jake Sanders's disappearance. Local authorities and the prosecutor's office announced that the incident was deemed an accident in which Jake allegedly got involved while trying to independently investigate illegal hunting. Investigators, upon completing their work, officially confirmed that they did not find specific evidence directly linking Jake's disappearance to the activities of illegal hunters or corruption among local officials. Their conclusion stated that, despite the presence of suspicious circumstances, a direct connection between Jake's disappearance and illegal hunting could not be confirmed 100%. The authorities' decision caused widespread public backlash. Local residents were disappointed and concerned about how the case was closed. Many believed that the official conclusion did not reflect the true situation and that the real reasons behind Jake's disappearance remained hidden. Local media continued to discuss the story, emphasizing that the official version left many questions unanswered. In response to public pressure and negative reactions, authorities began taking measures to calm the public. They offered compensation to Jake's family and friends for emotional distress but asked them to sign a confidentiality agreement to prevent the disclosure of investigation details and avoid further public unrest. Although the case was officially closed, some documents and evidence were classified. This created an impression that something was being kept from the public, and that the true reasons behind Jake's disappearance might have been significantly more complex than presented. The story of Jake and the mysterious creature at Lake Madison continued to grow with myths and rumors. Local residents became even more cautious and wary, and Lake Madison became a place that no one dared to enter. Stories about the mystical creature and its connection to Jake's disappearance became part of local legend, with many believing that the place was still guarded by unknown forces. Jake's story and disappearance gradually faded into obscurity, becoming a topic of discussion in local forums and conversations. But behind this official closure, a veil of mystery and uncertainty remained. Years after the closure of Jake Winters' disappearance case, the story of his mysterious vanishing and the enigmatic creature at Lake Madison has become a local legend. The lake, once a quaint and picturesque spot, has turned into a symbol of unresolved mysteries and fears for the residents of Harrison County and the surrounding areas. Lake Madison and its surroundings are now officially closed to visitors. Warning signs and barriers installed throughout the area serve as a reminder that the place may be dangerous. Although locals continue to talk about it, they tend to avoid the lake, fearing possible encounters with the mythical creature or other unforeseen hazards. Despite official restrictions, Lake Madison draws the attention of tourists and researchers eager to uncover the truth. Private expeditions, night tours, and even local investigations are organized. These ventures attract both professionals and enthusiasts of the paranormal, who hope to find evidence of the mythical creature or uncover new details about Jake's disappearance. Local authorities strive to minimize attention to the lake by restricting access and enhancing security measures. They emphasize that the closure of the area is a precautionary measure aimed at protecting the public, not an acknowledgement of the mythical creature's existence. However, this only fuels interest in the location and contributes to the growth of rumors and myths. One early morning, a group of tourists traveling through Harrison County decided to spend the weekend at Lake Madison. They were aware of the local legends but were not particularly inclined to believe them. During their stay, one of the tourists, named Michael, noticed unusual movement in the forest while they were by the lake's shore. Michael, armed with a camera he had on hand for recording the local scenery, began filming what caught his attention. He captured not only the fog enveloping the lake but also a figure that unexpectedly appeared in the frame. It was a large, dark shadow with indistinct outlines. When the tourists returned home and reviewed the footage, they discovered that some frames not only showed the shadow but also strange, unnatural movements. The creature on the video seemed to be enormous and covered in dense fur. It moved toward the camera but then vanished behind the trees. While the footage itself raises many questions, it also evokes a sense of unease and curiosity in viewers. Michael and his friends decided to share the video with the public. They posted it on popular platforms and local news outlets. It immediately sparked a flurry of discussions and speculations. Locals and paranormal enthusiasts began actively discussing the new video, which once again drew attention to Lake Madison. Although local authorities tried to avoid revisiting the topic, they were forced to respond to the surge of interest. Sheriff John Hayes and his deputies, now with an updated team, were compelled to conduct several checks. Despite their efforts, no evidence of the creature was found. The authorities were only able to confirm that the lake remained closed to visitors and urged the public to stay calm. Paranormal experts and cryptozoologists began analyzing the video. Their opinions were divided. Some believe the creature in the video is merely a play of shadows and optical illusions, while others think it could be evidence of an unknown being. The video also became a topic of discussion in scientific and mystical circles. The story of Jake Winters and the mysterious creature, which once again captured attention, continues to live on in popular memory, reminding us that some mysteries may remain unsolved. The video has become a new element in the narrative surrounding the lake and has left many questions that may never be answered.